Welcome to Design Your Life in Business, the podcast for leaders by Bright Mind Consulting Group. We give you the necessary tools to help you become the architect of not just your business, but your life too. I'm your host, Jevon Wooden. Hey, Julie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you? It's so good to see you again. It's been a long time.
It has. It's always great to see you. You are a busy woman. I mean, it makes sense, though, because you are a networking expert. So, of course, you're busy.
Yeah, if I wasn't busy, I'd be doing it wrong, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, I'm glad to have you on Design Your Life in Business, the podcast for leaders today. This is a topic that is very important, and we're going to get into, touching virtual and in-person networking. So, designers, make sure you tune in, get your notes ready, get ready for the show notes and everything, because Julie always brings the value. So, you ready, Julie?
I'm ready.
All right. So we're going to start off with a question I ask every guest. Who are you? Who is Julie Brown?
Oh, geez. So I love this question because I have this networking tool called the List Yourself approach, where normally I'm sure your guests probably describe themselves as what they do for a living. We in America, we have this problem of defining ourselves by what we do for a living. Starts when we're young. We ask kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And then the first question you're asked in college is like, what's your major? And then the first question you're asked when you're at a networking event, when you've graduated, is what do you do for your living? So we have this tendency to define ourselves by what we do for a living. So my answer to you is going to be that I am a wife. I'm a dog mom. I'm a runner. I'm a mountain biker. I'm a wine enthusiast. I really like bourbon. That's how you and I met, over love of passions. I'm a world traveler. And then, you know what? For a living, I do network coaching and professional speaking.
I love that, Julie. Yeah, that is so interesting. That is always the second question. What do you do at networking events? And I know we got to ask that because we want to know, but I kind of feel like people ask that to kind of square you up and size you up a bit. What do you think about that?
Yeah. And it's a very antiquated way of looking at networking, where the old ways of looking at networking would be, oh, I need to find people who can help me do something right now. Where I look at networking is I want to meet as many people as possible. I want to know as many people as possible. I want to have a broad, wide network full of people that I can help, that I can connect to each other. Maybe I can't help them, but I know somebody who can. So I think looking at networking more of how do we build a fabric of people who can help each other, consistently help each other, and be invested in the other people's success, versus I'm only looking for people who can do something for me.
Yeah, that's the key right there. That kind of ties into a question I wanted to ask you, which has been burning in my brain since I knew you were going to come on here, is everything is digital, right? Everything is digital. And then we also talk about this other word, authenticity, right? So what does that look like for you, like an authentic relationship? And why is it crucial for business owners and leaders to prioritize authenticity?
Well, I think an authentic relationship is one that you're building out of mutual trust and admiration, and you like the other person, not because you're constantly keeping score of what am I doing for this person? What is this person doing for me? People used to think of networking very much as quid pro quo, where an exchange was happening in the moment. I can do this for you and you can do this for me. Therefore, we're good networking partners. But the truth is, I'm rarely going to need something at the exact moment that you need something. So why not build relationships in which I am giving when I can give and you are giving when you can give, and I don't feel bad about taking when I need to take because I've already given so much to the relationship. So I think if you think about it, authenticity in that term, it's like, ask yourself, am I building this relationship because I like this person? I respect this person. I want to be helpful to this person. I want to build integrity and trust with this person. Or am I just checking a box and hoping that something's going to come to me immediately in return?
Absolutely. So I know I'm thinking this question, the designers are probably like, okay, I want to build these authentic relationships, but you know what? Life be lifing. I forget about this person that I connected with. How do you make sure you stay in touch, stay in contact with people?
Well, this is interesting. It could be done in a couple of different ways, where everybody might have a customer relationship management database. So a CRM, as they're known, where you put everybody you know in, how you met them, when was the last time you talked to them, keep track of the emails that you send them. You could go in there and make sure, like, oh, when was the last time I talked to this person? Oh, it's been 6 months. I should probably check in with them. Or I have a good way of doing this where I use my content as a way to stay in connection with people. So I have a weekly newsletter that comes out every Wednesday that goes to my entire list of people who have asked to be on that list. I post on LinkedIn at least 2 times a week, sometimes 3 times a week. I have a podcast that comes out every Wednesday. These things that I'm doing, this content that I'm creating, is a way of me being in conversation with my network because they get my newsletter, they listen to my podcast, they see me on LinkedIn. It does a lot of the heavy lifting for me. And I know this, Jevon, because I'll go to events where, I mean, I remember when the world first started opening up after COVID and I was starting to go to events. I hadn't seen people in person, in the flesh, in like 3 years. But everybody said to me, oh my God, I see you everywhere. They didn't see me everywhere. They saw my content everywhere and they felt connected.
That's a great point, and I feel like it's a point we hear a lot, like, "Hey, create content, be omnipresent," all these different things, but you do it kinda differently. You do it in an authentic way, and that newsletter, I'm on it, y'all, it's amazing, by the way, it's very entertaining. She turns an everyday story into something like a life lesson, business lesson, so you wanna get on that, and we're gonna tell you how by the end of this conversation, but, yeah, you make a great impression, right? And this brings me to the point, and people always talk about that first impression being a lasting impression. What do you say to that? How do you make a genuine first impression first that is lasting? And then also, how important is it really?
So there's a couple of ways you can do this. I agree. And I would like to say that I'm not that person who the first time I meet them, I'm like, no way. But I am that person. Like I do hold first impressions with really high regard. So a couple of things. If you are meeting someone, say you're going to a networking event and you're meeting someone for the first time, you're going in there, it's a bunch stranger, be really interested in that room. There is something to say for like how you make people feel. So even if you are nervous about going to that event, which going into networking events can be a high anxiety situation for a lot of people. So go in with an attitude of, I could meet somebody here who could change my life. Like there are strangers here that could be my friends. And go in with like a feeling of excitement versus fear, because people will see that on your face. And then be really interested about learning about what's in the people that are in that room. Don't be so caught up in being like, oh my God, how am I going to talk about myself? Go in there with some really interesting questions to ask people that don't revolve around what do you do for a living or how are you or boy, look at this weather or wasn't the traffic terrible getting here? Like go in there armed with what I call dopamine inducing questions, which are questions like, hey, are you a podcast listener? What podcast do you listen to? What are you binging on Netflix right now? What was the best trip you ever took? Okay. Question, top 3 cities in the world. Like things like these are dopamine inducing questions, and they're perfectly acceptable to ask at networking events because nobody wants to talk about what they do for a living. Believe me, it's the number one hated question that ever, like studies show it's the number one hated question is what do you do? Because people are like, oh yeah, I worked all day. Now we're going to talk about working all day. So the second thing is the truth. And the second is in order to make a good impression on the first impression is use this thing called triadic closure. Now, triadic closure means you're being strategically introduced to somebody you already know. So, for example, Jevon, if you had a friend that you were like, I really want Julie to meet this friend, what you would do when you would prime that conversation, Julie, I want you to meet my friend Jackie because she is this, and you have this in common, and she's so amazing. I love you guys' energy, and I think you'd be wonderful together. Like priming that introduction through a strategic introduction is a really great way to make a first impression because you've already been pre-vetted. It's kind of like the friends of my friends are my friends thing. And Jevon, you and I are friends, so I trust you and I respect you. And so if you are friends with somebody, you're not going to introduce me to somebody that wouldn't be a good connection for me on an energy level or being able to help each other.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I like the point you made earlier about keeping track about your various connections. What are they like? Where are they located? What are they looking for? How many kids do they have? Are they married? All those types of things. I like that when it comes to genuine connections and being able to say, hey, this person is top of mind because maybe we check in every month or we just check in, we see their content, whatever the case may be. And then you made the point of the triadic closure, which I love. I never knew what it was called, but I knew that it was something, right? Because that introduction makes it warm, like you were talking about and referring to. So the other thing with networking is even if it's warm, like sometimes we just go, we try to get quantity over quality. We end up with a bunch of different business cards. And it's all superficial. We want to go in there. We want to be intentional. We want to make these connections. How do we avoid that? How do we delve deeper once we ask those awesome questions you said?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say to your listeners is you're not going to build a network overnight. So don't go to one networking event and feel like you have to meet. Like, number one, it's impossible. It's exhausting. You'll end up having really shallow conversations and an inability to follow up the next day. So realizing that networking is something that you're going to work on every week. So go to an event with a plan to meet. Okay, I'm going to meet three new people. Because think about this. If you went to a networking event every week and every week you met two new people, at the end of a year, you'd have 104 new relationships to manage and foster. That's a lot. So don't try to meet everybody in one shot. It's never going to work. So I go into networking events. I don't go into networking events and try to work the room. That's not in my vocabulary. I go in and I say, okay, I'm here to meet two people I've never met before, really get to know them and figure out how I can be a good part of their network and they can be a good part of my network. Because the thing about it is, there's also this thing called the sphere of influence, which means that, Jevon, you probably have 250 people in your network in which your opinion carries weight. Same with me. I probably have a minimum of 250 people in my network in which my opinion carries weight. So if you meet two people at a networking event and you have a great dopamine inducing conversation with them and you have the ability to follow up, that means that you could potentially have triadic closures with 250 people from each of those persons' network. So you don't have to meet everybody in that room. You need to make one connection and see how you can branch it off and get strategic introductions. And then you do that every week or every other week, however your schedule allows.
Got you. I love that. And I'm sure there's some the introverts of the group. They're probably saying, yeah, that sounds awesome, but I hate speaking to people or it drains me. What are some of the tools that they can use so they can become effective networkers?
Well, they already are effective networkers. I want to put to bed this idea there's something wrong with introverts. Societally, we like to tell introverts that they should change. We like to tell introverts that they're doing something wrong. We never tell extroverts to shut up. We never tell them to let another person get a word in edgewise. We put them on a pedestal of what it's like to be social, a social butterfly or whatever. Introverts, you're already good networkers. And if you're doing it the way I'm asking you to do it, which is like, don't go into the room and try to meet everybody. Go in and try to meet two people and like really foster that relationship. And then in a couple of weeks, do it again. The thing about introverts is they're much better listeners than extroverts. And that's fact, not opinion. And that's what's so great about these dopamine inducing questions is you can come in armed with these questions and just let other people talk. And introverts are better listeners. They're better at follow up. They're usually more prepared to go in a room, meaning they've maybe done some research on who's going to be in that room. They might know who they want to talk to, where extroverts tend to wing it because they can just walk in and feel comfortable in a room. I would really like to put to bed this idea that introverts aren't as good at networkers. I think they're much better networkers than extroverts, to be honest.
And I'm glad you said that because me too. Like you said, they listen. And when they do talk, it's not just to hear their own voice. They're talking and it's meaningful conversation. So I agree on that wholeheartedly. One of the things I even struggle with is networking virtually. What are some tools and tips that we can use? Because I know I get in the room, I just start doing something else or listening, then something happens in my personal life. What do you do?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there is if you were going to an event, you wouldn't bring your laptop with you and you would hopefully not be on your phone. You wouldn't be reading an article. And you wouldn't have all of these distractions that we have in a virtual networking space. So what I would ask your listeners is if you're going to invest your time in a networking event that is taking place virtually, be present. Shut off your notifications. Don't have anything around you that's going to distract you. Close the door so you're not hearing what's happening outside of that door. And really be present in that networking event. I'm going to say that building networks, it will change your career. And when you understand how important it is, you will I would hope that you would approach each event with the respect it deserves. And virtual events need that as well. I actually think virtual ones are easier because a lot of people have trouble remembering people's names, and your name is written right on your box. The first thing I do is I write down everybody's name that's in that event because these tend to be smaller events, more intimate events. I write down everybody's name and so I can look them up on LinkedIn, figure out what they do for a living. If they're one of those people who doesn't talk a lot, I can say, we were in the same event last night. I wrote down your name. We didn't get a chance to talk, but I looked you up on LinkedIn and this is what we have in common. And yada. Networking events virtually are just as effective as in-person ones. The magic is in the follow-up. Like 80% of building and maintaining relationships is just following up. And you can fail at follow-up in an in-person event just as bad as you can fail at follow-up in an online event. So for me, it's about being present, making a connection, and then taking the time to follow up afterwards. It's always in the follow up. The magic's in the follow up. You want to blow away your competition, get really good at following up with people.
Yes, indeed. And you really have to be intentional about taking those notes you were saying. Like when you do meet someone, take that time to fill it out right then and there because you will forget if you don't. So you definitely have to like have that CRM. Most of them have an app that you can use, or even just your notes app on your phone is a great way to be like, oh, I met this person here. Yeah, I agree. I don't mind reaching out to people and DMing them and seeing who they are and learning more about them for sure. What do you feel about that? Do you feel like outreach, especially cold outreach? How do you perceive it?
I very rarely do cold outreach because I use the power of triadic closure and strategic introductions so well. So, another thing I want to talk to your listeners about is people think of networking as this sort of like amorphous thing that doesn't have a framework and you just kind of wing it. Like, there's nothing else in your business that you would ever not have a framework for, or that you would just wing. You would set up systems and frameworks for you to succeed at whatever that part of your business is. And so it always shocks me that people think they don't have to think about, okay, strategically, who do I want to be introduced to? Who do I want to be connected? Which information can I find out about them? How many different ways am I connected through triadic closure with them? Can I call those people and say, hey, I really want to be connected to John? So in your network, I know that you're connected. Can you tell me a little bit about more about him, or would you be willing to make an introduction for me? So I very rarely have to do cold reach outs. When I do cold reach outs, I make sure that I research that person ad nauseum, like trying to figure out what would be on their list yourself approach, what goes beyond their title. People are very good about putting some personal items in their bios. A lot of times they're like, it's like this big bio. And then the last two lines is like, on the weekends, actually likes to spend her weekends hiking in the Adirondacks with her husband and her two dogs, Pepper and Chompers or whatever. And I'm like, okay, so now it's a person. Now I can connect on a personal level. So I reach out, say why I want to connect, the research that I've done, why I think I might be a good connection because of these things that we have in common, but also say, hey, listen, I saw on your bio that you enjoy doing this. Like, I also do that too. Here's a dog picture of me and my two dogs hiking the Appalachian Trail or whatever. Like, making myself a human to them on a very human connection. So I very rarely do cold reach out, but when I do, I spend a tremendous amount of time making sure that that email gets returned.
Absolutely. And like you said, you make sure that it's that relationship. It's not transactional for you. You're talking about things that most people wouldn't even mention because they're sending something that has been already pre-written and it's just like a script. So I love that. Finding those two things that normally wouldn't pop up in a bio or just on their LinkedIn profile, or if it's in there, it's deep down in that most people don't catch. So yeah, that makes sense. And then with LinkedIn and tools like that, you can literally see who people are connected with. So that's definitely a tool that can be used if you know you're connected with someone, you've established rapport with someone. You can be like, hey, I noticed you're connected to these two. I was looking at whatever. So mind introducing me to them. So that's an awesome way to do it, Julie. So you are a podcast host. We mentioned that. We broached over it. We came over it. But
You were on my podcast.
yeah, exactly. I was on it. And let me tell you, this energy, you want to subscribe to her podcast. She's dropping knowledge just like she is here, but that energy is something else, something to behold. You have some awesome guests on there. I had the privilege of being on there, right? What's some of the most surprising and maybe counterintuitive networking advice you've ever heard?
I think I've gotten a lot of bad networking advice over the course of my career. And I think it was mostly when I first started out. I think it was mostly like you have to look for people who can help you, or maybe there's also when I was first starting in my career, it was like the idea of that I didn't have anything to give. Like, I think there's this idea that if you're young, you don't have things to give to networking events, or why would anybody want to be connected to me? And it's like, technology is your superpower. Like, I need help with my tech all the time. Like, what does this mean? What are all this? Like, the younger people who are just coming into the working world, like the postgraduate world, they wonder why they would should be at a networking event, or what kind of impact they could have on somebody's network. And the truth is, you have no idea the impact you can have on somebody's network until you start talking to them. And so I would just convince people to just have conversations and meet as many people as possible. You never know what you can help somebody doing. We live in this very like, it's you're too young, it's too early, or you're too old, it's too late. We live in this sort of, I call it the avocado sense, where you only have like this very small period of time where you're ripe and you're perfect for whatever you're doing. Like, we need to throw that sentimentality away.
Yeah, and that's kind of interesting because especially now we're seeing a lot of young people who are just making huge impacts out there. So it's kind of like it's up to you, really. You decide how impactful you want to be when it comes to networking. Speaking of that, how do you envision the future of networking? All this technology and changing the nature of work with remote work and all this stuff. What do you foresee taking place in the networking space?
Well, I think our networks are going to get a lot bigger. So I know mine did. During COVID, I live in Boston and I'm at very much a New England Northeast presence. And then COVID happened and my network exploded geographically because I was thinking about it differently. And I don't think we'll ever go back to a way of thinking where we don't do parts of our lives virtually and we don't have relationships virtually. And I just think our networks are going to become so much more geographically broad and helpful going forward, because we don't think about the fact that we don't get to see each other or stay in the same room or maybe have ever met as a barrier to our relationship building.
Absolutely. I mean, you can talk to people all over the world, whether that's establishing a friendship or doing business with them. So it's really like, I think it's great. I think it's wonderful what's taking place here. And I believe that we just have to adapt all the new resources that are coming into the fold. So I'm glad that you feel the same way. So what's next for you, Julie? What do you have coming up?
So I have some interesting things happening. I'm working on a brand new keynote right now that I'm delivering for the first time. I don't know when this will come out, but I'm delivering it in September to a CFO's conference. And it's super important. It's super timely. It's about the power of internal networking structures within major corporations and even small companies as well. And it's to combat employee retention problems and employee loneliness problems and employee happiness problems. Their studies are showing that the effective building and use of internal networks and having frameworks from day one to for employees to build internal network is so impactful for employee retention and happiness, that I'm focusing on that for a little bit right now. Like, build a framework and to give for this in September. And I think it's going to be amazing. I think it's going to transform a lot of the ways that companies onboard new employees and or transitioning employees within their company, which are being transitioned to other parts of the company or being promoted within, having actually onboarding structures for promotions as well, which are going to circulate around my expertise, which is the networking and the internal networking structures. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah, that's going to be powerful because some organizations that's literally, especially if you're in like a consulting firm stuff, networking is how you move forward or move up. But then other organizations, they just kind of leave you out in the wind. They say, "Hey, welcome to the team. Figure it out."
And it's so super important for Gen Z, which is the students who are graduating from college now, because a lot of their internships were virtual and a lot of their schooling was virtual. And companies are they're holding back on hiring Gen Zs because this perception that they really have subpar communication skills and people skills. And so our company's jobs, it's like our company's jobs to build the frameworks for our employees to be successful. It's not the other way around. So if we can come up with frameworks where even people who studied remotely and all did all of their internships remotely, where from day one they have frameworks to build cross silo networks, to address skill gaps, to have psychological safety within the office, like that's our responsibility as company owners. It's not the graduate's responsibility.
I wholeheartedly agree. So I'm just gonna ask you, I'm gonna try this out, see if it works for me or not. Do you care to give us like a snippet of some of the groundbreaking work that you're presenting here in your keynote?
Yeah. So what is funny is I have this thing which I mentioned at the top of this interview called the list yourself approach, which is understanding people from a 360-degree angle. And one of the first tools in this is having all new employees, new hires, fill out this list yourself framework to share who they are and have that be shared to the company. So when a new person is hired and it's their first day, it's not like, okay, it's John's first day in the office. It's no, it's this person's, like this whole being's first day. And these are all the things we know about it. And so that people from the ERG groups can introduce themselves and say, oh, you should be a part of our ERG group. And like maybe they have a pickleball like team in their office. And like, so understanding the whole person that's being hired, not the title that's being hired, and doing that in advance, like having that in advance, also having all of your paperwork, all of that mind numbing paperwork that most people are stuck doing their first day in the office, having that all done electronically. We know we can do that all electronically prior to their first day in the office so that their first day in their office is actually more about culture and fitting in than it is about the rote things that we have to do to actually get our computer and get like payroll and all of that set up. So that's one of the first things that I'm doing. And the other thing within this framework is understanding how we can have cultures of cross silo communication and cross silo team building. Because in large corporations and even small corporations, some people only know their team. And I mean, think about the knowledge gaps that could be filled if we had cross silo communication and networking across all the different parts of our companies. So those are two of the things that I'm focusing on. And then there's a couple more pieces of the framework.
Absolutely. And I love it because it aligns with some of the stuff I talk about as well, like job rotation, doing the day in the life trainings and all this other stuff. So there's no single points of failure. Cross team collaboration is super important because if I'm working and I don't understand how what I do impacts the rest of the people, then it can kind of feel like my work is meaningless at some point, or I just don't know what the goal is. So I think that everything you're doing is definitely spot on, Julie. And I love that having all that paperwork and stuff done before we get on. That takes like a week, and then before we even integrate into the team. So yeah, definitely on point with that. I have seen some organizations they attempt. I think the email thing. They send out this email and they're like, "Oh, this person is coming to the team, and this person is known. They hike, they have family, and all that stuff." But I think we can take that a little deeper. So I'm glad we're talking to the C-suite to help them out with that.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. So I deliver that. I'm looking at my calendar. I have 5 weeks before the debut of that keynote. So I'm still working on it.
Hey, I know it's going to be fire. We got a little sneak peek. So designers, go ahead and find out where Julie's speaking next. And you definitely want to be in that room if you can. All right, Julie, we're going to move on to our by design segment where I ask every guest the same 3 questions. Number one, what has been the hardest part about designing a life and business you don't need a vacation?
Ah, I'd say the hardest part is so for me as a solopreneur, it's shutting my brain off because I'm constantly like, I love what I do so much that, like, even when I'm on vacation and I'm reading a book, I'm like, oh, I got to put this down. I got to write this down because I love what I do so much. So I think there's an element of shutting my brain off that is probably the hardest, or shutting that part of my brain off. That's the hardest part.
When you figure out how to do that, please let me know. Number two, what is the best lesson you've learned on your entrepreneurial journey?
To take my own advice. So I think when we are coaches and we are experts, it's easy to fall into a trap of do as I say, not as I do. when we have to remember that what we teach, it works. It works and it's impactful and it's powerful. And so sometimes even have to remind myself, like, Julie, you teach people how to do this every day. Why aren't you doing it for yourself? So always taking my own medicine.
Yeah, that is definitely hard because when you're doing it for others, you got that 30,000-foot view. But when you're in the fight, you can't see that counter coming. So it makes sense. Number 3, what are 3 tools or tips, I know you gave a lot already, that you would recommend when scaling your business?
Oh, well, the first would always be network. Build that network. Having a team of people that are invested in your success and that you can go, it's not even about leads. Sometimes it's just information, bouncing things off of people, like a different way of thinking. So the first one would be definitely network. The second one would be, as soon as you can afford to, outsource whatever doesn't give you joy. Because I will tell you, accounting doesn't give me joy. So I, for so many years, did my own accounting and I was miserable. And then I was like, when I realized how much it costs to just have an accountant, like, I was like, why didn't I do this? And so not even just outsourcing the things that don't give you joy, but the things that take up too much of your time. Like for me, I outsource all of my graphics and my video editing and all of that. Like as soon as you can outsource what isn't up here making you money, outsource it. And the third one would be take vacations.
Absolutely. You got to recharge. Rest is just as important as the work. So appreciate you, Julie. It's been fun as always. Always love when I see that name pop up, when I have a conversation with you. How can everyone connect with you?
Yeah, a couple of different ways. If you want to get on that infamous newsletter that Jevon mentioned, you can go to my website, which is Julie Brown, B as a boy, D as in dog, juliebrownbd.com. You scroll down to the bottom, you can put in your name and your email and you get added to my email list. And you can see my speaker video and all of that there. A great place to keep in touch with me is on LinkedIn. I do most of my social networking, social content delivery on LinkedIn. And so I'm Julie Brown BD on LinkedIn. So same as my website, Julie Brown BD on LinkedIn. The only caveat is I would ask your listeners, when you reach out to me and you want to connect, just use that triadic closure. Say, I found you through Jevon's podcast, because that is already going to endear me to you. And I get so many requests every day to link in with people that I don't know, that I don't accept most of them because I wait for that triadic closure to come through.
I love that. Yeah. Make sure y'all use some of them skills she just taught you if you didn't know it before or if she reminded you. So thank you so much, Julie, for coming in and teaching us all about networking. Really appreciate it. Hey, designers, remember, keep ascending. See y'all soon. Design Your Life in Business, the podcast for leaders, is brought to you by Bright Mind Consulting Group. To find out more about Bright Mind Consulting Group and how you can become the best leader possible, visit brightmindconsultinggroup.com. Make sure you search for Design Your Life in Business on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Bright Mind Consulting Group, we cannot thank you enough for listening.